In the autumn of 1965, the Higgins family, Thomas, Eleanora, and their two children, Margaret and Billy, vanished without a trace from their ivy-covered cottage in the secluded Yorkshire village of Ashworth. At first, their disappearance was treated as a curious, but not unprecedented matter by the local constabulary. Families had left before, the village elders said. Sometimes people simply sought better lives in London or abroad, but no goodbye letters had been sent. Their car was still in the drive. A kettle, long gone cold, sat atop the stove. A table was half set for dinner. Not a single suitcase was missing. And yet the entire family had simply gone. 3 months later, what had begun as a search morphed into something far more sinister, when investigators made a grim discovery beneath the foundation of St. Mary's Church, a hidden chamber filled with the Higgins' personal belongings, ritual paraphernalia, and a collection of disturbing handwritten journal entries that would tear open the quiet illusion Ashworth had maintained for generations. Among those pages was a final entry written in Eleanora Higgins' unmistakable script, dated 2 weeks after the family had been officially declared missing. The Church of England immediately sealed the investigation, ordering all documentation transferred to a restricted diocesan archive. For the next 20 years, neither the public nor surviving relatives would receive answers. Ashworth returned to its eerie slumber. The Higgins cottage remained locked and untouched, a frozen tableau of interrupted life, as if the air inside refused to shift or settle. Local children began to cross the street rather than walk past it. Older villagers merely muttered about what was lost and lowered their eyes. But in 1985, following a Freedom of Information inquiry by a persistent archivist from Leeds University, sealed church records were partially unsealed, revealing not only that the Higgins were not the first family to vanish, but that the incidents had occurred cyclically for nearly a century. An unearthed dossier detailed the disappearance of at least 4 other families, each sharing eerie similarities in the weeks leading to their vanishing. What appeared to be coincidence at first glance soon gave way to a terrifying hypothesis. Ashworth was not the victim of misfortune, it was the host of something ritualistic, deliberate, and inherited. Ashworth itself was the kind of village that seemed immune to time. Nestled in a bend of the River Skell, its cobbled lanes twisted through moss-choked fields and oak-lined groves that always seemed a bit too still. Tourists rarely found it, and those who did often forgot how they arrived. At the center stood St. Mary's Church, its Norman tower casting long shadows over gravestones so weathered that even the dead seemed to be disappearing. Villagers clung fiercely to heritage. Family lines were recited like prayers, and newcomers were met with polite but distant smiles. Outsiders often remarked on the air of knowing silence that settled over Ashworth, as though every resident shared an old unspoken memory. Within that silence lived the Higgins family. Thomas, the village postmaster, was a man of principle, precise, punctual, and deeply involved in parish affairs. Eleanora, his wife, possessed an unusual beauty and a fascination with local folklore, often seen wandering the woods with tattered field journals and canvas sacks of drying herbs. Their children were charming in the way children of well-respected families tend to be. Margaret had a wild imagination and loved writing short stories. Billy was quiet, prone to drawing, and unusually observant. But something changed in the weeks before they vanished. Eleanor began keeping odd hours, seen under the moonlight collecting rare plants not known to grow in Yorkshire's autumn. Neighbors overheard her muttering to herself, always in tones too reverent for common prayer. Thomas, once gregarious and predictable, became erratic, his handwriting deteriorated, and he once confided in a fellow churchwarden that he dreamt nightly of stone, halls, and chanting voices. Margaret turned inward, submitting essays at school filled with references to thresholds, echoes, and the old ones. Billy, most unsettling of all, began to draw the same scene repeatedly, hooded figures standing in a circle around an altar, their faces blank, their arms outstretched toward a black disk in the sky. These weren't simple childhood scribbles, they were detailed, consistent, and deeply unnerving. On October 31st, the Higgins family was last seen attending a small harvest service at St. Mary's, witnesses recall, Margaret clinging tightly to her mother's sleeve, her eyes darting toward the shadows behind the altar. Billy refused to speak that entire day. After the service, they returned home. By morning, the house was silent. Every door was locked from the inside. Sergeant Robert Henley, the lead investigator, followed increasingly strange leads until a loose stone in the church vestry revealed a narrow staircase leading into darkness. Descending into the damp catacombs, Henley found a sealed stone arch partially broken, revealing an underground chamber untouched for what appeared to be centuries. What he found inside would haunt him until the end of his life. Items belonging to the Higgins family were laid out with careful deliberation. Billy's favorite toy soldier, Margaret's ribbon, Thomas's rosary beads, all placed in a semicircle around a squat black altar, its edges worn smooth by time. The air smelled of mildew and something sharper, metallic. Beside the altar were several leather-bound volumes, some bearing ecclesiastical seals, others hand-bound and written in archaic script. Their contents told a story older than any church, registry of a secret society, embedded in Ashworth, one that performed rites dating back to pre-Christian Britain, possibly older. Henley traced the disappearances further back. In 1930, the Morrisons, a family of 3, vanished after joining a church-run historical study group led by Father Blackwood, a man whose name appeared frequently in the journals found underground. In 1939, the Dunbars disappeared during a blackout after attending a private Vespers service. In 1956, the Bradfords were reported missing the same week their cottage was rented to a new family. Each case had been quietly closed with fabricated explanations. Emigration, marital troubles, unexplained absence, all bore the same pattern: gradual behavioral changes, fascination with folklore or ritual, and final disappearance around Samhain. The true horror lay not only in what had happened, but in how many knew. Dr. Edmund Carr, the village physician, had altered medical records to support the idea that families had chosen to leave voluntarily. Margaret Thornton, the village librarian, had falsified newspaper clippings and disposed of evidence from the Higgins home. And at the center of it all stood Reverend Harold Whitmore, a charismatic figure who had resurrected the Ashworth Historical Preservation Society in 1962. What had begun as academic lectures slowly morphed into monthly gatherings, then reenactments, then private ceremonies held beneath St. Mary's. The society's true function was revealed in Eleanora's final journal entry. Tonight, we fulfill the old covenant. The veil is thin. The gate awaits. It became clear to Henley that the church was the gateway, not metaphorically, but physically. Old maps revealed a network of limestone caves beneath Ashworth, many leading directly under the nave of St. Mary's. Locals spoke in hushed tones of chambers that breathe, and songs in the stone. Some even whispered of a sacrifice required to keep the land whole. When Henley pressed further, he was quietly reassigned. His notes confiscated, his warnings ignored. The official record shows he retired early, but those who knew him said he was never the same. In 1985, dying of lung cancer, a former constable named Malcolm Wright came forward. He admitted that on the night of the Higgins disappearance, he'd been patrolling near St. Mary's when he saw 4 hooded figures leading the family into the church. He said Margaret turned and looked at him with wide, tearful eyes before the door shut. And from within he heard her scream, once sharp and terrified, then silence. By the 1990s, Ashworth had become a ghost village. The last remaining families moved out following a series of mysterious house fires and sinkholes. St. Mary's was demolished, the site paved over, but construction workers complained of strange tremors and tools disappearing. Some refused to return after hearing what they described as chanting underfoot. In 2003, a paranormal research group conducted an overnight study near the church ruins. Their audio equipment recorded a single, faint toll of a church bell, despite no bell tower within miles. On foggy autumn nights, hikers along the Skell say they still hear those bells. And if the wind is right, voices, whispers, a girl's voice crying for help, a boy reciting something in a language no one recognizes. The Higgins family, like the Morrisons, the Dunbars, the Bradfords, were never found. No bodies, no graves, just echoes, and a question that will not die. How many other villages hide such secrets? How many disappearances are not random but ritual? And if Ashworth could conceal a cult for over a century, how many more are out there still watching, still waiting for the veil to thin? If you've read this far, you're already too close. Keep your lights on tonight. And whatever you do, If you hear bells ringing from beneath the ground, do not follow them.